The Buddha once said that there are three things that cannot remain hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The morning of December 21st, 2015, Charlie woke to a knock on the door. She'd been sleeping in her brother Maxwell's living room on the floor because she'd finally decided to leave him for good. She thought she meant it this time. Max came and picked her up. He told her that he had enough gas money to get her to Helena or to her grandmother's, where she would be safe from the defendant. Like many times before, Charlie had every intention of breaking it off for good. The knock on the door was the defendant. Between her resolve the previous evening and that knock, early that morning, Charlie caved in again, texting the defendant that she loved him and missed him. He texted that he thought she was leaving him. Reacting to whatever she read into his messages, Charlie tried to calm him and assured him that even though her phone battery was dying, that she left Max's front door open and asked the defendant to come back and get her. Over the course of their 8 to 9 month relationship, the level of control that he was exerting was steadily increasing, and his reactions and her injuries escalating. There were times that she talked about getting away, and even did for a few days, but the defendant would convince her to return to him. As Charlie's self-esteem deteriorated, she thought she can't find a better man. She'd been worried that he would kill her, and she told her friends that if she went missing, to look for her body up Patty Canyon. She said he'd taken her to a place up there, far from the earshot of any of the houses, and hurt her. She knew that she was on the losing end. But with the knock that morning, either buying time or really missing him, or both, she got up, she hugged him, and she told him she was sorry. The defendant takes her back to his house, his bedroom. He locks the door. A few hours later, Charlie has a broken rib, a broken nose, a lacerated and bleeding spleen, and punctured lung, and she is dying. Charlie's last day alive ended up Patty Canyon when the defendant tossed her off the road into a ravine in frigid temperatures, where she landed 29 feet below, up against some brush where she froze. Less than 29 feet from you sits that same man. The defendant was a hurricane, Emmanuel. For Charlie, the storm that would eventually end her life started on the day she met him, and the day she met the defendant, and it ended in a gulch in Patty Canyon. He owned her, he used her, and when he was done with her, he threw her away. This is a case about a woman trapped in a violent relationship with her boyfriend. The severity of the abuse increased over time. It included ripping out her hair, black eyes, and a broken nose. Later, you'll hear evidence that he tried to choke her and broke one of her ribs. Finally, he re-broke the same rib, lacerated her spleen, and stabbed her in the chest, puncturing her lung. He put her in his car, still alive, and drove, not to get medical attention, but rather several miles into the mountains in Patty Canyon in the Deer Creek area in the sub-freezing temperatures, and dumped her into the elements. After a multi-agency search and rescue effort was launched, Charlie was located, and her body was recovered several days later. The law is pretty clear. The defendant's been charged with 2 counts: deliberate homicide and partner family member assault for the period of time during which they dated, up until the day before he killed her. Partner family member assault is charged as a continuing course of conduct, and the judge will read you these elements before you go back to the jury room, but that he caused her harm, he hurt her, and that she was a partner of his. The elements of deliberate homicide are that he caused the death of another, a human being, and that he acted with purpose or knowledge. You'll hear witness accounts, people who were around them at the time, during the time that they dated, before this event happened and after he killed her. They were introduced by her brother Chuck. Last spring, Lucy Carlson, who's Charlie's grandma, will testify that she remembers the day that she met him. She and Charlie were very close. The day that they met, she said, a chill would come with him. When he walked in the room, there would be a chill. She met him at the Cracker Barrel in a restaurant, and then she and Charlie were going to take Charlie's little boy, Harley, who was 5, to the dinosaur show over at the university. He left for work. He said he had to work. But he kept coming back over and over and over to check on her, to make sure that she really was at the dinosaur show. Lucy will testify that Charlie would laugh, and they would all laugh and have fun with Harley, and then when the defendant came back into the room, everything got quiet. Later that summer, Charlie surprised Lucy with a visit from her and Harley. They laughed and played soccer together outside in the sun. Lucy noticed the bruises on Charlie's arms during that visit. Tirsa Rollins was a close friend of Charlie's. She worked with her at Safeway. Tirsa will tell you that she became increasingly scared for her friend after she met the defendant, that she saw bruises, burns, and other indications that Charlie was being severely abused. Kimberly Mulcair, Charlie's best friend from Helena, came to Missoula one time to help her escape back to Helena. It wasn't long before the defendant came to Helena and got her and brought her back to him. Charlie worked at Patty Creek Market in the deli. She was very well liked there and a hard worker. The defendant would come in to check on her and would make her coworkers nervous, they'll testify. She made it clear that she was not allowed to speak to her male coworkers because her boyfriend was jealous. Several of her coworkers, including her supervisors, noticed that she had bruises, clumps of hair missing, and a black eye. On October 25th, the defendant got a boxer's fracture, and that's what it's sort of a lay term for what the doctors call a fracture to the last bone in your hand. They call it a boxer's fracture because oftentimes boxers received that when they were fighting. At the same time, Charlie sees a different doctor for a broken nose, a concussion, and black eyes. He tells the doctor that he hurt his hand on fixing his car, the hood. She tells her doctor that she ran into a beam above the stairs at his house. On December 16th, Charlie tried to work. She came in and she was having difficulty breathing, difficulty standing, and was crouching down onto the floor. Her coworkers became immediately concerned about her well-being again, and her manager took her to the emergency room at Community Medical Center. Charlie tells the triage nurse, Bennett Holes, that her boyfriend choked her, beat her, and that she was having a really hard time breathing. She told the emergency room doctor that this injury was the result of violence at her boyfriend's hands. And the radiologist determined that at the site of the rib pain, there was a previously broken rib. It was a re-injury in the same place. That was December 16th. On December 19th, Charlie called and talked to her grandma Lucy for the last time. She asked for some money to put on her phone, and they talked about Christmas presents. Lucy wanted to send some presents to other members of the family that lived in the Missoula area and asked if she could send them all in one package to Charlie at the address where she lived with the defendant. Charlie said, of course. December 20th, the next day, is when Max picked her up and took her to his home where he lives with his girlfriend Megan and their baby. She had gotten away from him at last. As I mentioned earlier, Max said he had enough gas money this time he could take her to Helena to get her away from the man who was supposed to be taking care of her. Max would take her to Grandma's Lucy's house as well, whenever she wanted, until she could get back on her feet. The next morning, one of Charlie's roommates, one of the defendant's roommates, Chris Eckhoff, and his girlfriend Hannah Kendall were downstairs in the room directly below the defendant's bedroom where he brought Charlie. Chris and Hannah will both testify that they heard arguing. Hannah will say she heard arguing and then a loud thud, like something being dropped. And then, unlike anything she'd ever heard, a piercing scream coming from the room above them. They got dressed, she'll say, and it took a few minutes, came upstairs, just as the defendant ran out in his car, and he was pulling away from the house, and she'll say it looked as if he was holding something down in the back. Chris showed the detectives later a blood trail from the bedroom to the front door and out onto the stoop, or where he had seen a blood trail. He got upset, and he ended up writing the defendant a note, and you'll see the note, to the effect of, you need to knock this off. It's getting crazy. There's blood everywhere. The constellation of injuries that ended Charlie's life started with a thud and ended several miles and a few hours later in a remote area of Patty Canyon. We'll show you where that is on an aerial photograph so that it makes more sense and you can see where it is in relation to his home and to Patty Creek Market where she worked. During that time, though, those hours, Charlie was in the exclusive company of the defendant and his hurricane of rage. Charlie suffered a broken rib, a lacerated and bleeding spleen, a broken nose, a stab to the chest, and aspirated on blood and struggled to breathe for a length of time, while the defendant made the decision to hold her away from anyone who could help her. He did not try to save her life. He did not seek any kind of medical care and did not contact any of her loved ones. What he did do is he shoved her bleeding into his Tahoe and drove around, away from Missoula, away from care, away from people who cared, and away from the law. He concealed her deep in Patty Canyon. While she bled, while she struggled to breathe, while she was dying, he didn't call out. There was a cost care nearby. There's a fire station nearby. There's 2 hospitals here. There's an ambulance. Anyone. The defendant got to the place he knew. He got to the place that Charlie knew. He stopped there long enough for some cigarette papers to fall out and for Charlie to bleed into the snow at the top of the bank. He then tossed her down a snowy chute, down the embankment, and left her there in the bitter cold. GPS coordinates will place him in that area at that time. There's Charlie's blood in his vehicle and Charlie's body near where his vehicle was. The defendant then started the tedious process of scrubbing away his crimes, scrubbing away every trace of Charlie's existence, cleaning out his bathroom, cleaning out his bedroom, and cleaning out the Tahoe. It was quite an undertaking, all of this cleaning, for somebody who's not particularly tidy. In his haste, however, he left traces of her behind. One of Charlie's co-workers was a young man named Dylan Moore, and they became friends. They really liked each other and visited a little bit, and she began to disclose to him what was going on. He lived at home with his mother, and you'll meet both of them. His mother's name is Sherry Hargis. And Sherry was the kind of very involved mom, and she would stop in Patty Creek Market, and she would talk to all the kids that worked there and kind of get to know them, and she'd say, "Hey kids," and they all called her mom, and she was very involved that way, and so she kind of got to know Charlie as well. She didn't show up for work. 1 shift, 2 shift. By then people are starting to get really worried. Dylan goes home, he tells his mom, "I'm really worried about Charlie. It's not like her to not show up, to not call in." Sherry takes it in her own hands and goes over to his house, knocks on the door, and confronts him. "Where's Charlie? Where's Charlie?" "She's gone and she ain't coming back." You'll hear from the witnesses. They'll tell you what they know. Their statements will be corroborated by physical evidence to the extent that we are able to produce that. Every witness statement, however, woven together, will corroborate that this relationship was one of power, control, dominance, and abuse. The evidence will prove that the defendant was the one who killed Charlie, that she may have lived had he taken her to get medical care for the trauma that he inflicted upon her, and that he dumped her body and then immediately started taking steps to start his life over. The case isn't without its weaknesses, as all cases have their weaknesses. We can't tell you exactly how he did it, move by move. We talked about that in voir dire. The order in which he inflicted the injuries. But we know the injuries are there. We know in which window they happened, and they know that she was in his exclusive control during that time. We can show you who did it, and we can certainly show you why. After the presentation of the testimony, we're going to ask you to find him guilty. Guilty of both counts. Deliberate homicide and partner family member assault for hurting her over the course of their pretty short relationship. In so doing, we're asking you to hold him accountable, responsible for what he did to Charlie, for hurting her, for causing her death, and then dumping her in the woods. The witnesses will each lay bricks, some big bricks and some small bricks. But when you place those bricks together, those bricks make a path. And that path leads to that chair where he sits, a chair that he earned with violent distinction.